Good morning again. After the presentation of the National Holocaust Archives, we are now turning to Transnational Holocaust Archives. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Eleonora Bergman from Warsaw. She was also a co-author of 20 case studies on history and preservation of Polish towns, and of 5 books and about 50 articles. The focus of her documentations are synagogues in Poland from the 19th and 20th century. Since 1991, she works at the Jewish Historical Institute as researcher, but also deputy director, and between 2007 and 2011 she was the director of the Jewish Historical Institute. She's also co-author and curator of several versions of an exhibition on the Ringelblum archive, which was shown in Germany, in the US, in Spain, and in France in the years 2000 to 2010. She's also an expert on the Auschwitz-Birkenau site management plan, and since 2004 involved in preparing the full edition of the Ringelblum archive. Today she's not talking about the Ringelblum archive, but about the Emanuel Ringelblum Jewish Historical Institute Warsaw, parallel not common Jewish post-war documentation projects. Dr. Bergman, please, your paper.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this conference. When I started to do research for this paper, I soon realized that I should add one phrase to the title. It will be presented from the Polish or Polish-Jewish perspective. One of the first post-war documentation initiatives was the Historical Commission formed by the Central Committee of the Jews in Poland, a representation of all Polish Jewish survivors. The committee came into being almost immediately after the liberation of Lublin in the eastern part of post-war Poland in late July 1944. The first meeting of its historical commission took place on August 29. In the fall of this year, the Union of Jewish Writers, Journalists and Artists was invited to join, and together they founded the Central Jewish Historical Commission, and I will then use the abbreviation CJHC. It was at the meeting still in Lublin on December 28 in 1944. Warsaw was liberated only 3 weeks later, in January 1745. Its director was appointed Dr. Philip Friedman. In March 45, the headquarters were moved to Łódź, or Lodz, and several branches were established in Krakow, Wrocław, Warszawa, Białystok, Katowice, and 21 other places. Noé Gries wrote in 1946, "We started to build our knowledge not for knowledge itself, but knowledge memorial for our fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters. We wanted to eternalize the memory of our murdered parents, brothers, and children of our fallen heroes. We strived at unmasking Hitlerism, racism, and anti-Semitism, and to call for fight and the just punishment for committed crimes." End quote. The Commission was eventually one of the 19 departments of the Central Committee. It is important to remember that it was not a separate and independent body like CDRS in Paris. And we just heard the presentation about CDRS, so I'm glad I don't have to repeated. The CJHC collected documents, books, and other prints, iconographic, ethnographic, and artistic materials, diaries and memoirs, and maps. Its members conducted research, prepared source materials for publication. They published literary works. The most important archival collections they retrieved were files of German and Jewish administration of the Lodz or Litzmannstadt ghetto, files of the Jewish self-help. This was the umbrella organization for various Jewish organizations. This was the only one which Germans allowed to function officially. And it was active until mid-1942. And above all, among the collections was the first part of the Ringelblum archive. Of the several dozen books, in fact, 38 books published until July 47, the most important were documents and materials on history of the Jews under the Nazi occupation in 3 volumes. Camps, it was volume 1, volume 2, Aktionen, or actions and deportations, and the 3rd volume on Lodz ghetto. Then there was by Michał Borwicz, University of Criminals, and underground movement in ghettos and camps. The last one was edited by Betty Eisenstein. But the most important task of the commission was collecting testimonies of survivors. In order to teach interviewers to take them, 3 brochures were written and issued in Polish in 1945 for collecting historical and ethnographic materials and for survey of children. The 4th brochure in Yiddish included a summary of all of them. And it was, it had 209 questions. The goal was, and I quote, to listen to every Jew in town, to record his experience and fate of his family and loved ones, end quote. And the purpose was to complement the official documents, especially German sources, which Commission also collected. The questions covered a broad range of issues like forced labor, establishment of ghettos, ways of survival, Polish-Jewish relations, etc. The instructions concerning children were of special character. In the introduction, it read, quote, the goal of educators is to raise the healthy Jewish generation. We have to confront children with the past if we want to learn about their reactions to external phenomena and internal changes which occurred as a result of terrible experience. We need to find out if the past is still overwhelming or the present has already blurred the image of that sad time, end quote. And there are approximately 450 children testimonies in the collection. Now, basing on the number of registration cards, I will show some of them later, gathered by the Commission, approximately 342,000 Polish Jews lived in Poland for some period of time between July 44 and December 50. This means that about 1/10 of pre-war Polish Jewish population survived. Approximately 1,800 testimonies were collected in the years 1944-46. There were some 5,000 until the end of 1949. The other were sent later, even in 1990s. In fact, it's the open collection. And it numbers close to 7,300 files. However, the number of testimonies authors versus this estimated numbers of survivors, which I just gave, is approximately 2%. It is not impressive when related to the initial plans to listen to everybody. However, not everybody identified with the Commission's priorities. People just wanted to forget and to leave. For interviewers, the work was not indifferent either. Each conversation recalled one's own experience. Anyway, comparing to results for DP camps, where collected testimonies constituted about 5% compared to the number of people in the camps, it was not a small achievement if we take into consideration that in DP camps it was much easier access to people to be interviewed. I took this data from the new book by Laura Jokusz, Collect and Record, Jewish Holocaust Documentation in Early Post-War Europe, which is the first and very interesting attempt to present those first initiatives. It has to be recalled that the Central Jewish Historical Commission in Lodz and then in Warsaw and all the branches collected testimonies of survivors from the former Polish territories, some of which got under the Soviet rule in September 1939 and after the war became parts of Ukraine, Belarus and Lithuania. It was never researched, so it is hard to say how big part of the collection they form. We should be aware, however, that the documentation collected in Poland is partly referring to post-war Soviet republics. Many of these testimonies were used in the trials of Nazi criminals. The Commission cooperated closely with the governmental Main Commission for Investigation of German Crimes. It provided materials for prosecutors and courts. It participated in preparations for the Nuremberg trial with its memorandum, Destruction of Polish Jewry under the German occupation, 1939-1945. The Commission leadership included Philip Friedman, whose picture you can see. He was the first director. He was PhD in philosophy of the University of Vienna. He taught social and economical history of the Jews in the Institute of Judaic Studies in Warsaw in the years 1937-39. He survived in hiding, lost his wife and daughter. After 1945, he taught history of the Jews at Lodz University. In the summer of 1946, he left for Paris, then for Munich, and in 1948 for the USA. He was a witness at the Nuremberg trial. I'm sorry, I don't have pictures for everybody. So, the Nachman Blumenthal was deputy director, and then in the years 47-49, director of the Jewish Historical Institute. He was MA in philosophy of the University of Warsaw. He wrote instructions for collecting ethnographic materials, which I mentioned before. In his book, Innocent Words, published in 1947, just 1 year after Victor Klemperer's Lingua Tertii Imperii, or Language of the Third Reich, Blumenthal wrote in the introduction, In Nazi Germany, simple, gentle words became words, sound of which made one's heart stop beating. In 1950, he left for Israel. And I would like to add that if we read Klemperer, it's like with some distance to what happened. It's a lot of irony, but Blumenthal's book is just still full of terror, of fear. It's like this past he's living again while writing this book. Now Michał Borwicz, head of the Krakow branch. He was a poet, writer, essayist, literary critic. He was MA in philosophy from the Jagiellonian University, and then after the war, PhD in sociology in Sorbonne. In 1942-43, he was a prisoner of the Janowski camp in Lvov. He succeeded to escape and join the partisan movement. He edited the anthology of songs and poems from the occupation time. The song will remain intact, published in 1947. And from that year, he lived in Paris. Then Joseph Kermisch was the Secretary General of the Commission. He was PhD in philosophy from Warsaw University, historian of the Jews in the 19th century in Warsaw and Lublin. From 1950, he was a head of the Yad Vashem archives, in fact, until he retired, and he died only 8 years ago. He published many documents from the Ringelblum archive in translation into English and Hebrew. And then Joseph Wolf was a treasurer. He studied in Krakow to be a rabbi, and then he studied philosophy in Nancy and Paris. In 1940, together with his family, he was imprisoned in the Krakow ghetto, in 1941 in Auschwitz. He succeeded to escape a death march. Then he lived in Berlin, and he initiated a museum and documentation center at Wannsee. He wrote a lot on the Third Reich and was so disappointed that was not enough attention given to it. He committed suicide in 1974. Among several dozen researchers, some held a PhD, Szymon Datner, Adolfina Eber, Laura Eichhorn, Nella Thon-Rost. Some held an MA, Dora Agatstein, Helena Drobner, Nathan Sternfinkel, Mendel Turek, Hirschwasser. Yet others have not finished their studies, like Rachel Auerbach, Róża Bauminger, Diana Grünbaum, Nathan Gross, Noe Gruis, and still others had no university training, like Szmerke Kaczergiński or Maria Hochberg-Mariańska. But these are names of people who contributed a lot to this documentation. The leadership of the Commission saw its work as fulfillment of Dubnow's vision, according to which writing of the nation's history was the nation's task. And we heard about it from Jonathan Brent yesterday. The Commission certainly considered its work a continuation of Oinek Szabe's efforts with the use of the same Ivo methodology, also because the members were Rachel Auerbach and also Hirschwasser and his wife, and also Genia Silkes. She wrote the instructions for children. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture. The collection of testimonies is definitely complementary to the Ringelblum archive records. And thank you, Sam, for your talk yesterday about Ringelblum. Probably in 1945, a group of commission members formed a research institute. It included Philipp Friedman, Nachman Blumenthal, Noé Gries, Josef Kermisch, Rubin Felschuh, and Leon Bauminger. Following the resolution of the Central Committee of the Jews in Poland of May 3, 1947, the whole commission was transformed into the Jewish Historical Institute and moved from Lodz to its building on Tłomackie Street, where it operates to this day and where I have honor to work. Just a few examples of materials collected and by the commission. So registration cards, it's approximately 300,000 of them. So this is here a person who survived in USSR, and here of somebody who survived in concentration camps. So this is the main source for genealogical research today, this whole collection, which is transformed into a database. Then it's a relatively small collection of cards of Jewish prisoners of war who were imprisoned in Lublin, in Lipowa Street, and then sent to their communities, and of course most of them perished in the Holocaust. And very small collection, like a few hundred of documentation of confiscated immovable property. But I am not going to show a lot more because it would take a lot of time. A Polish commission saw the destruction of Polish Jewry in European context, and it intended to work with other institutions and individuals devoted to the same cause. We find a memorandum prepared for the delegates going to London, perhaps in September 45. The addressee was probably Wiener Library. The delegates were Dr. Emil Sommerstein, Dr. Adolf Bergman, and Itzhak Zuckerman, and some other. The text was prepared in Polish, Yiddish, and English. In conclusion, it reads, quote, "We have no doubt that on the other territories freed of German occupier similar work is conducted. The time has come to coordinate these works." Further, some camps where Polish Jews were imprisoned were in various European countries. Polish Jewish survivors often gave testimonies to various commissions abroad, and on the contrary, the Central Jewish Historical Commission holds material concerning Jews from various European countries. Indeed, in the collection of testimonies, we find those taken abroad, 83 in Bucharest, from April 11 to July 15, 1945, 29 in Linz, 11 in Paris, 7 in Munich, and 14 in Vienna. In Bucharest, they were recorded by the Association of Polish Jewish Refugees in Romania. 60 were taken even before the contact with the commission was established. This association had also, quote, 100 photographs showing murders committed by Germans in Poland, a collection of poems from a ghetto, forests by escapees, etc. 20 original documents concerning Polish Jews. And these testimonies are all in German, most likely translated from Polish or Yiddish. We don't know why. On December 6, 1945, Friedman wrote to Paris to a certain Grzegorz Meissler, quote, "We are in contact with England, America, and the Soviet Union. In Paris, we established contact with Dr. Alfred Abrahammer. We don't know who he was either. On October 1845, Friedman asked Abrahammer for materials on A. Polish Jews, B. All camps where Jews were kept, C. All anti-German demonstrations in which Jews participated, and D. Materials on German atrocities committed against Jews. So it can be considered the quintessential scope of interest of the Commission. And there was also the Federation of Polish Jews in Belgium, ready to collect materials for the Warsaw Commission. Basing on the repertory of the Commission's correspondence sent and received, we can say that in England, beside the Wiener Library, they were also in contact with Federation of Polish Jews in Great Britain, Association of Jewish Journalists and Authors in England, Jewish Historical Society, the London Committee of Deputies of British Jews. In America, there were numerous institutions and organizations, and among them, definitely the most frequently contacted was IVO. As for the Soviet Union, Friedman must have had in mind Solomon Michaels and, in general, the Anti-Fascist Committee in Moscow. So now I'm back to Laura Jokusz's book, in which she analyzed 3 types of documentation projects of the CDRC, from Paris, of the Warsaw Commission, and those conducted in the Jewish displaced persons camps of Germany, Italy, and Austria. And here I quote, so you see how, what was the size of this, let's say, DP community. Of 184 Jewish DP camps and assembly centers in Germany, 150 were located in American zone, 23 in the British zone, and 11 in the French zone. Among the 73 Jewish DP camps in Austria, 53 were in the American zone, 12 in the British, and 8 in the French. In Italy, half of the Jewish DPs lived in 73 Hachsharot. The other half resided in 17 mixed population camps formerly under Italian supervision, but cared for by UNRWA and AJDC. End quote. So in case of these camps, we can talk about the network of historical commissions, and almost everywhere they were started by Polish or Lithuanian Jews, and of those Polish Jews, many had previously worked in one of the commissions in Poland. In Munich, a dozen survivors established a historical commission on November 28, 1945, and almost a year later, it named itself the Central Historical Commission and began to supervise regional commissions in Bamberg, Frankfurt, Stuttgart, and Regensburg. Then in Bergen-Belsen, it was established the archive of the time of the extermination of Jewry. So it was established in October 45, and in the spring of 47, it became the Central Historical Commission of the Central Committee in the British Zone. And one of connected was the Jewish Historical Commission for Lower Saxony in Göttingen, which began its work in May 47. Then was also a Jewish Historical Commission established in Linz in Austria in early 46. So in general, these commissions were working very similar to the Warsaw Commission. Now, in the collection, which is the basis for this paper, several posters can be found. This one from Munich, And you see this main inscription on top, which is "Remember what Amalek did to you," and it's the whole history. I mean, not the whole, but the selected catastrophes of Jewry in the world, and then they are asked to. This is from this is the title of Laura Jakosch's book, Sammelt und Verzeichnet. Now another poster, also from Munich, from Göttingen, and this was some exceptional situation that DP people in the DP camps got interested in the history of the local Jewish community, so they have shown several documents, photographs from the community in Göttingen, including the photos of the synagogue which existed there and became just a rubble. So we have all those posters, but a contact with these organizations is not at all reflected in correspondence, except for some mentions in some Reisman's letter to Friedman on May 21st, 1946, and Friedman's letters to the Commission of June 46, where also other organizations are listed. Quote, in Prague, a committee was formed to establish the Society of the Friends of Central Jewish Historical Commission. In Nuremberg, I secured further materials for our commission and spoke about close cooperation with the commission, with delegates who came from Frankfurt. I spoke on cooperation with Munich Historical Commission. Then he writes, Friedman writes, with Dr. Albert Weiss, chairman of the Central Committee of the Jews of Yugoslavia, I spoke on establishment of a Jewish Historical Commission in Belgrade. In Paris, I already contacted all the organizations. So most probably CDGC, first of all, but one of those must have been Organization of Polish Jews in France, as he wrote on their stationery. Other members of the commission were certainly interested in similar initiatives. On July 2nd, 1946, Noah Gruis wrote to his colleagues, quote, as for a Czech historical commission, there was one here, and its goal was to collect documents from Terezin. This commission was established by the Jewish Agency. It worked for a few months, it collected whatever it was able to, and transferred to Jerusalem. Another proof of contacts with various DP camps organizations are periodicals in our library collection, and I just list a few of them, like Ad Monterhind, it was in the UNRWA lager, published in 1946, then Auf der Frey, published by Politische Häftlinge in Stuttgart, then Unsere Hoffnung, wochentliche Zeitung, herausgegeben von die befreite Juden in Eschwege bei Kassel, and Unser Welt, nationale Wochenschrift für der Sherit Hapleta, edited by Mordechai Zederboin in München. And we have many of them, and so one would expect some correspondence on the subject, but there is none. I will almost finish with this picture recalling the monument for the ghetto heroes, which was at that time was being built in Warsaw, and you can see that on top we have the same phrase, remember what Amalek did to you. So we can somehow see that the spirit was a common spirit, but about the connections we don't have enough information. Laura Jokusz, so I'm coming back to her book, she starts her book with recollections from the conference held in Paris in 1947, attended by representatives of 13 countries. She wrote in conclusion for a chapter devoted entirely to this event, quote, "In retrospect, the 1947 European Conference of Jewish Historical Commissions and Documentation Centers is notable as the first attempt to fully comprehend the Jewish catastrophe, its scope and challenges to researchers and historians." End quote. And I will then recall another conference in Paris in 1996, where Jacques Frege, at the time still director of CDGC, was making clear connection, quote, "The beginnings of the Cold War put an end to this attempt of coordination that is restarting today. And then by setting up this conference, the CDGC wanted to show the necessity of a European agreement to give value to this heritage, but also to facilitate its historical exploitation. However, I can't agree with Laura Jokusz's statement that as a result of the 47 meeting, the CDGC leadership was virtually unchallenged in Europe. Because, as we know, there was no common follow-up of the 47 meeting. Almost the same can be said about the conference of 49 years later, which gathered representatives of 25 countries. There was a guidebook published to archives containing the Holocaust-related material, but it did not start a coordination. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that there was something we can call a Polish model of documentation, adopted to various extent by commissions in DP camps. And there were also other organizations, and the commission in Warsaw was cooperating with those dealing with documentation of Polish Jews. Other commissions focused on their Jews and developed various models. We've heard here about the especially Hungarian model. In Poland and France, the materials remain where they were collected, respectively, of course. In Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia, the results of work of the commissions were part of a huge Yad Vashem new project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eleonora Bergman already started to introduce our next speaker, Yaakov Borut, who is going to present Yad Vashem. So I think we are already in the spirit of listening to his paper. Yaakov Borut was born in Jerusalem and studied history and political science at the Hebrew University, where he received a PhD in 1991. With his thesis, A New Spirit Among Our Brethren in Ashkenaz, German Jewry in the Face of Economic, Social and Political Changes in the Reich at the end of the 19th century. Since 1983, he's employed at the Yad Vashem Institute in Jerusalem, where he served as editor of the Pinkas Kehilot Germania, the handbook of Jewish communities in Germany. Since 1999, is member of the Yad Vashem archive staff and currently the referent for German language materials. Yaakov Borut wrote 3 books and co-edited 2 others, as well as numerous articles on Jewish and German history during the Kaiserreich and the Weimar period. He also published a book on Austrian Reiches among the nations. He will now present the Yad Vashem archive as an archive of the Holocaust and new developments and new possibilities. Please.
Of course, I'd like to thank first Eleonora and all her wonderful staff, not only for bringing me here, but also for taking the trouble of providing me with kosher food, and not less important, kosher chocolates, for which I'm very grateful. Now, the session that takes place in a conference on the last day and just before lunch is known in British scientific circles as the graveyard slot. And British conferences usually don't take place in this kind of weather. In view of these circumstances, I will do my utmost to try and keep you awake, or at least keep most of you awake. The idea of establishing a memorial for Jews murdered by the Nazis was first proposed in September 1942, when reports were received of the mass murder of Jews in the German-occupied countries. It was offered by Mordechai Shenhavi, a member of Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, at a board meeting of the Jewish National Fund. When the full extent of the catastrophe became known, Shenhavi's proposal gained momentum, and one was approved by the institutions of the Jewish Yishuv in Palestine in late 1945. The preparations came to a standstill during the Israeli War of Independence in 1948. They were resumed afterwards, and on May 18, 1953, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, unanimously passed the Yad Vashem law, establishing the Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Authority. The law was officially published on August 28, 1953. The Yad Vashem law had set for the new authority certain goals of commemoration, which you can see on the screen, and I will not read them aloud. The law also assigned tasks to Yad Vashem, which you can also see on the screen. Note that those tasks include not only commemoration, but also helping research of the Holocaust. The authority was set up as a corporate institution administered by a council and a directorate. The law also provided that the Minister of Education would issue regulations for the authority methods of operation. That minister, Ben-Zion Dinur, who was a distinguished Jewish historian, was appointed Yad Vashem first chairman in 1953. Ben-Zion Dinur was an active chairman. According to his views, he placed the historical research at the center of Yad Vashem activities. He gave secondary importance to the museum and commemoration buildings. That policy aroused the opposition of the survivors' organizations. Dinur also came into controversy with some leading European Jewish historians who survived the Holocaust and came to work in Yad Vashem, and some of them were mentioned in Dr. Bergman's paper just now. He came into controversy with them because he criticized the academical level of their work. The result of these controversies was a public campaign against Dinur as Yad Vashem's chairman, and he resigned the post in 1959. Since 1966, the post of chairman of the council and of the directorate were separated. What evolved over the years was a system reminiscent of the Israeli or Austrian system of government, or if you will, the British system. The chairman of the council is an eminent honorable personality who is hardly involved in the day-to-day running of the institute, like the president or, if you will, the British monarch. Today, that role is held by the former very popular chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Israel Meir Low. The chairman of the directorate is like the prime minister. He is the boss, he is in charge of the operations of the institutions. Today, this is Avner Shalev. From the outset, Yad Vashem has engaged in historical research conducted by the research department under the guidance of an advisory board made up of representatives of Holocaust research institutions in Israel universities. I will not read you out all the details and historical dates concerning those activities, just tell you shortly that Yad Vashem organizes and hosts scholarly congresses, symposia, conferences, seminars, and workshops on Holocaust-related subjects. It also published a research annual, Yad Vashem Studies. Some of the people here had published it on its pages. It is published in Hebrew and English, and recently also in Russian. Yad Vashem also publishes many books. A major part of Yad Vashem is a museum. It was opened to the public in 1957, and a new building designed by a world-renowned architect, Moshe Safadia, was opened in 2005 in the presence of leaders from 40 states and the former Secretary of the UN, Kofi Annan. As you can see in the picture, it consists of the long corridor cutting through the mountain. Connected to it are 10 exhibition halls, each dedicated to a different chapter of the Holocaust. Now let's turn to the archives. Yad Vashem archives house the largest collection of Holocaust documents in the world, and you can see the numbers of the screen. And as we speak, those numbers are probably growing. As we noted, Yad Vashem had the double aim of commemorating the Holocaust victims and supporting research about the Holocaust. This duality was expressed in the collection activities. On the one hand, like any other archive, the Yad Vashem archives collects documentation about the Holocaust, both about perpetrators and about the victims. But another unique sort of collection takes place at Yad Vashem is the collection of names and personal information on the individual Holocaust victims. The most important way to do it was by creating and collecting pages of testimony. Here you have an example of the screen. Please take notice of the beautiful handwriting. I wrote it myself when I was young for an aunt of mine when I still had no idea that I would ever work for Yad Vashem. These are special forms designed by Yad Vashem to restore the personal identity and brief life stories of the murdered Jews. Pages of testimony are submitted by survivors or remaining family members or friends and acquaintances. The first 800,000 names on pages of testimony were collected during the 1950s with ongoing global outreach efforts to identify the still unnamed victims. Today, we have some 2.6 million pages of testimony written in more than 20 languages. In 2001, in a large operation, the pages were digitized and the information stored in a central database made available on the internet. In addition to pages of testimony, the central database of Shoah victims' names contains names from varied archive sources and lists, bringing the total number of individual victims registered to circa 4 million. As you can see, you have two sets of numbers on the screen. The higher numbers is the number of names we actually have, but many of them refer to the same person. So we assume the lower numbers are more realistic. Now I want to describe the immense changes that took place at the Yad Vashem archives in the last few decades. But before describing these, I would like to demonstrate one facet of the abilities we have developed to save Jewish victims from oblivion. These abilities are based on collecting vast quantities of records, not only historical, but also administrative records, and the ability to sort those records and find relevant information. Now here is an example. This is a page of testimony filled out for Aryeh Bigun of Brest-Litovsk. We have a name with very little information, but with the help of documents copied on local archives, we can expand our information. What we see now is a request for an ID certificate filled by Aryeh Bigun in Brest-Litovsk in 1941. This document informs us that he is a physician. It gives us his address, which is Pilsudskiago number 13, and provides us with a photograph. Next, we have Bigun's personal tax files in the Brest-Litovsk municipality. A tax statement from October 1941 shows us the address of his clinic, which is the same as his home address. And we have his statement that he earns 810 rubles per month. But below we have a very lengthy text from the tax inspector. And he says that this statement refers only to Dr. Bigun's income from his medical clinic. However, the inspector says he also accepts patients in his private home. The inspector claimed that he received 30 patients per day and calculated his real income at a handsome 6,850 rubles per month. So we now have for Dr. Bigun a part of his life story. By the way, I want to add that an assumption of 30 patients per day on not official working hours, that is an outrageous assumption. And I think we can assume a personal or maybe an anti-Semitic bias behind it. But this is beside our point. The next personal tax statement we have in the Brest-Litovsk municipality is from December 1941. This is already in the ghetto, which was established in November 15th, 1941. We have a new address, Kotushko 3, apartment 2. This is indeed inside the ghetto, and note that his former address did not have an apartment number. Apparently, he had a private house when he wasn't in the ghetto. Here we also have a statement from the inspector that Dr. Bigun works in the Jewish clinic in the ghetto, and the income assessment by the inspector is now 200 rubles per month, which is way, way below his former income. The last personal tax file we have is from August 1942. The address and the information are practically the same, and the income assessment now is down to 100 rubles per month. Dr. Bigun disappeared later. Apparently, he was shot when the ghetto was liquidated on October 15, 1942. Now, as you probably know, the Soviets set up special investigations committees shortly after the liberation of Nazi-occupied towns. We have managed to get those reports to the Yad Vashem archive, and what we have here is a page from the report about Brest-Litovsk showing the location of mass graves around the town citadels and numbers of bodies found there. This is perhaps Dr. Bigun's last resting place. We also have a list of victims from Brest-Litovsk prepared by that committee. And in this list, we have Aryeh Bigun, age 50, a doctor. But next to him, we have a wife, Sophia, age 48, and two daughters, Shulamit, age 22, who was also a doctor, and Selina, age 16. With that information, now we can go back to the files of the ID requests, ID certificate requests, with which we began our investigation, and find the photos and information about all the members of the family. This information appears now in our central database of victim names in various languages and is accessible on the internet. The example that I showed you is one result of the development that greatly enhanced our activities in recent years. Three major reasons had led to those developments. One is the availability of vast amount of sources that were hardly accessible before, including Eastern European archives that were open, and recently the ITS of materials from Arolsen in their entirety. Secondly, the advances in technology, especially computer technology, that enable us to sort through these vast amounts of information and compare them. And thirdly, the growing importance attached to Holocaust commemoration and knowledge throughout the world. The combination of these factors had enabled the Yad Vashem archive not only to vastly expand its holdings, but also make those holdings much more accessible and useful for the public. I want to analyze some of the developments and changes in the overall policy of the archives in recent years. First, the strategy of collection. I want to describe this by example of our acquisition operations in Germany and Austria, of which I am in charge. Our work in Germany received a large boost in the years 1999 to 2006. During those 7 years, the federal government of Germany had given Yad Vashem a yearly budget of a few hundred thousands of marks, later euros, for acquisition in Germany. That money was used to hire local workers in towns that host the major German national and state archives. These workers scanned the archives looking for documents which are relevant to Yad Vashem. Such documents were microfilmed and sent to our archives. Until today, our acquisition in Germany is based on the foundation laid of those years. Today, we have workers in the Bundesarchiv in Berlin and in the Third Archive in Hamburg, in Stuttgart, in Munich, in Saarbrücken, in Wiesbaden, in Darmstadt, and in Marburg. In Austria, our options are much more limited. Today, we have only one worker who is sitting here, who divides his time between the Austrian State Archives and the Wien Town and Land Archive. In our work, we make efforts to collect materials displaying the regional differences in the Nazi persecutions of Jews and in the Jewish responses. One strategy of achieving that aim is collecting materials of parallel institutions in different regions. So a researcher is able to compare how those institutions treated Jews. Between 2008 and 2010, for example, we had an operation financed by the German government in which we collected materials of the justice system in Bavaria, mainly Munich, and in the various parts of Rhineland-Westphalia. Those included records of courts, of the special courts, Sondergerichte, set up by the Nazi state to deal with offenses of political nature, and in a few cases also the police records. In the last years, we are trying to change our media of collections. After we moved from Xerox photos to microfilms, we now prefer to use digitation and scan the materials we acquire in the archives. And we prefer color scans, which would give the user an authentic view of the documents. Sometimes the color on a stain on a letter written in secret in a camp or in an underground movement, or the color of the pen in which a German officer wrote a remark on a document, are of crucial importance for the user. It is not always easy to scan. Sometimes the host archives are opposed to it. Sometimes they give us the permission, but ask us for prices that make us think of these people, the Somali pirates. But whenever we can, we scan the materials. When those materials reach our archives, they are registered. We have a group of people, including German and Austrian young volunteers, that are responsible for registration at the single file level. This way, we have a detailed registration of some of our record groups. And there are cases where historians from Germany and Austria prefer to use our archives instead of working in the original archives in the countries because the documents are better registered by us than in those archives. As you can see from the numbers, this is the numbers we had in 2012, and this is a very small number in an archive that has 154 million documents. We now apply a new strategy of registrations in which we automatically convert to our system the reports sent by our people on the ground. This way we can register much more files, although in a lower level of exactness. Here you have the number for 2012, and we intend to have much bigger numbers in the coming years. Another very important policy development in the expansion of the collection from the is the expansion of the collection from the traditional forms of written documents and photographs to other forms, such as video testimonies of survivors, films, both historical and new, and in cooperation with our museum, also artifacts. A project signifying this development is Operation Gathering the Fragments, a national campaign to rescue personal items from the Holocaust period. The idea was to get people who have things relating to the Holocaust in their attics, in their homes, and we are telling them, why don't you give those things, why don't you give those documents to Yad Vashem? In Yad Vashem, we can keep them under condition which will ensure they are preserved for long, and you can this way commemorate your family members by having their names and stories in the Yad Vashem database and in the Yad Vashem internet site. To organize these collections, we began in 2011 to send groups of people. We send them for one day to collection centers in various places. Beforehand, we publicize in those places. Yad Vashem will come to this place on this particular place and this particular date. You can come there and bring there your things. And the people sit there for one day. Usually between 10 to 80 people come on that day. And for people who have particularly rich collections, we send teams to their house. The success of Operation was far beyond our initial expectations, and you can see them now on the screen and get impressed. Another policy development of the archive is increasing the public accessibility by digitization and by presentation on the internet. Concerning the digitization, I said a few minutes ago that we prefer to scan the document we acquire. But we have many, many millions of documents and items that were acquired in the past. We want to have those materials accessible to our users through computer screens. Therefore, the archive, in conjunction with Yad Vashem's IT department, runs an ambitious digitization program using some of the most advanced equipment in Israel. You can see on the screen the equipment we use. The scanning process is performed using those machines and using a specialized software developed in Yad Vashem. It was developed by a computer expert of French origin, and he chose the name Sarkozy to our system. To date, we scanned all audio and video testimonies in Yad Vashem, all pages of testimony, all of our archives photographs, and about half of our microfilm rolls. Recently, we started to scanning the paper documents, and on the screen you can see our figures for the last year. We also try to improve the accessibility of our materials to the public, in the widest sense of the term, by trying to place as much of our materials as we can on the internet. In 2008, the entire Yad Vashem photo collection was placed on the internet, except for photos for which we do not have the rights and we didn't get permission from the original owners to place it on the internet. A few years later, with the help of the Israeli branch of Google, Each of our photos receives its own private IP address. What this means is that each particular photo can be found by a simple web search without having to go through the Yad Vashem internet site. Moreover, an OCR procedure was performed on the photos. This means that if a picture contains some form of text, for example, a banner saying, this is the 10th meeting of the Beitar Vorstand in 1910, or a plaque with names, this text can be also found on a simple web search. We get a lot of questions from the public. We have a special department for answering and helping those people who come to visit us or send us questions, and also you can see the statistics on the screen. To end my presentation, I would like to mention one future development that is on the planning board. It will be based on the various developments described so far, and in a way will form their culmination. This will be a private, virtual private file that will concentrate all available information on the individual victims of the Holocaust, their lives, their families, their fate, for each one of them, a little like we did for the late Ari Bigun, but on a larger scale and automatically. There are numerous problems on the way. How can we separate the information of victims with identical names, like the very many Abraham Cohens we have? It is easier if you know other information, like the birth date or birthplace, but we don't have that information for many victims. We will also need to separate private information which can be available only to relatives from the information that can be made public. In short, this is a huge undertaking which is only in the very initial starting phases. This project underlines Yad Vashem Archive's central role as a center commemorating the murdered Jews. And this is indeed the meaning of our biblical name. Yad Vashem, a monument and a name, is taken from Isaiah 56, verse 5. I will give them in my house and in my walls a monument and a name better than sons of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall never be effaced. Thank you very much.
Yeah, with our next speaker and the last speaker of this morning, we are now going to the United States. Dr. Frank Mecklenburg is going to present the DigiBaeck Institute, also in its newest developments. Dr. Mecklenburg is at the DigiBaeck Institute since 1984. Until 1996, he was an archivist, and since then he's chief archivist and director of research. He's supervisor of the branch of the LBI archives at the Jewish Museum in Berlin and the Digital Archives project, DigiBaeck, which he's going to present today. For many years, he has been the representative of the LBI New York in the LBI International Executive. As you know, the LBI has many international branches all over the world, Jerusalem, London, Berlin. And Dr. Mecklenburg is participating in annual conferences of Jewish studies and German studies, and is now in the process of writing and publishing a series of articles concerning the history of Jews in Central Europe during the 20th century from a post-Cold War, post-East-West perspective. His PhD in modern German history is from the Technische Universität Berlin in 1981. Dr. Mecklenburg, please.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the conference organizers for inviting me, and the DigiBaeck Institute, first time in Vienna. The DigiBaeck Institute was founded in 1955 by a group of refugees that had formed an organization, the Council of Jews from Germany. It was founded in Jerusalem and to set up 3 centers in the main immigration countries. The LBI is the archive of refugees and therefore represents the point of view of the victims of Nazi persecution, the subjective perspective of those who suffered death and or displacement. LBI presents the victims' sides of the Holocaust via family collections, accounts of individuals, memoirs, diaries, correspondence, and also the vast amounts of paperwork and official documents needed to get out of Europe or the failure thereof, and subsequent difficulties of entry into the respective country of exile and refuge. On the other hand, the archive also, and even more so, holds the documentation representing the history before 1933, the 60-odd years since the German Reichsgründung, as well as the experience of Jews in the Habsburg monarchy, and thus is the larger context of Jewish history in Central Europe, that is in the German-speaking territories of Europe in the post-emancipation era, although the holdings get thinner as we reach back into the early 19th century and the times of Moses Mendelssohn. What has become increasingly obvious in order to understand the historical catastrophe of the 1930s and 1940s, to comprehend the radical breakdown of Western civilization, we need to have a clearer sense of the developments before to understand that which was destroyed, to understand the situation that had developed over several generations and which came to a sudden end, although how sudden that is subject to debate. It depends on how you look at it. However, what happened so quickly in Austria, although it's with its own peculiar prehistory from 1934 to 1938, in Germany, the 5 years until Kristallnacht cannot only be judged in light of what comes afterwards, and certainly has to be seen in terms of Jews, but also in terms of all victim groups, political, professional, religious, and so on. Only for the later observer does 1933 foreshadow the laws of 1935, the Nuremberg laws, and the various events of 1938, and everything that started after the war started. The fact that major synagogues and other institutions, such as the old age home in Berghaus Straße in Berlin, were built in the late 1920s or early 1930s, those were not signs of the coming demise. Among the many collections of LBI, I can only pick a few, and I will give 2 examples of major collections. First, the letters of parents to their children abroad who had left Germany and Austria to find a better future, which in turn becomes the country of refuge and exile. And as a second example, the newspaper Aufbau, that is the newly available digital version of Aufbau. These 2 item categories, one from the perspective of the Jews as individuals and families, And in the case of the letters, and in the case of Aufbau, as the community at large in exile, both collections represent different modes of communication between the United States, UK, and Palestine, and many other countries. Among the letters, for instance, there is the collection of the family of Alfred Schütz as one of the examples from Vienna, lawyer and famous sociologist who happened to be out of the country on March 13, 1938, and from Paris he managed to get his family out, including his parents. Also a special case is Switzerland, in the midst of in the middle of Nazi-dominated and later completely occupied Europe, which, for instance, the journal Maß und Wert, Zwei-Monatsschrift für freie deutsche Kultur, published in Zurich between October 1937 and September 1940, edited by Thomas Mann and Konrad Falke, a bi-monthly but irregular paper, and where Aufbau reprinted an article from Maß und Wert in February 1939 with an article by Thomas Mann with the title Deutschland in seiner tiefsten Erniedrigung. The family letters during the late 1930s and early 1940s between parents in Germany and other countries and the children in exile, which are now found by the grandchildren after the death of their parents or after they move to an old age home. The grandchildren, now also in their 60s and 70s, are discovering the letters of their grandparents, who they never knew, and suddenly they find the voices of these grandparents. The language of these letters is very personal. The direct and continued conversation, which gives a picture of the relationships and the circumstances that cannot be found anywhere else in that directness and clarity. The change of tone and topics before and after November 1938 is striking. Often there's a gap in the correspondence for several weeks in November and December of 1938. The fathers were deported to Dachau, Sachsenhausen, and other camps until the early release for those who did manage to immigrate. However, in many cases, only to the neighboring countries to be caught by the Nazi forces sometime later in France or Holland. Before 1938, the parents would not be worried about their own existence. Many fathers had been soldiers in the First War who received an award in 1934 for the 20th anniversary of the start of the war, and not only as long as Hindenburg was around, but even after Hindenburg's death on August 2nd, 1934, awards were issued signed by Nazi officials. That is to say, until Kristallnacht, in many cases, it was inconceivable that harm would be done to those, would be done by the state and the government to those who had fought for the fatherland. But then in turn, it turns abruptly into panic with Kristallnacht and about getting out trying to negotiate the difficulties of the immigration, that becomes the dominant theme in those letters. For example, the correspondence of a family from a small place, a village 40 kilometers outside of the town of Gießen in Hessen, a community with only a few Jewish families where we learn about everybody around, since the parents are reporting to their daughters in New York about the developments for all the other families as well. Before November 1938, the mother is mainly concerned about the living conditions of the daughters in New York. They live in Washington Heights. Hedwig Edelmuth reads about New York and is worried about the harsh winters in New York. Whether they have the right kind of winter coats. The daughter's well-being is the main topic of those letters. The letters are usually written on Sunday after Shabbat. Monday is the day of laundry, but this all changes drastically after November 1938. Now the concerns are all about how to get out themselves. The father apparently was arrested, and we don't know anything about that, because then you couldn't write any longer directly what was happening in terms of the political developments. It seems that he was doing forced labor of some sort, but Hedwig Edelmuth cannot divulge the details. And we see also in the upper left corner of the letters, the first page, the censor marks in faint pencil marks. So the letters are now mainly about visa quotas, dealing with the American consulate, the infamous Stuttgart consulate, which made life particularly difficult for people. The youngest daughter, still in Germany, moves to relatives in Frankfurt, but then eventually they all are killed. But the letters are about the daily lives. Mother converses with her daughters about other means. It is a continuation of the conversation with the daughters by other means. The wording and the tone is the same, we can assume, as if they were communicating face-to-face orally. We do not have the answers to have both sides of the correspondence is actually very rare, but in few cases it is the case. But we can deconstruct the conversation. There are many responses to questions and statements in the letters from New York. And then after the civilized world has fallen apart, which is clear to everybody after Kristallnacht, it is more or less all about the worries to obtain visas, concerning the mountains of documentation and papers needed to obtain the necessary permissions and funds and visas, etc. There are a number of collections in the Leobeck Institute archives that actually show the piles and piles of documents necessary to manage the process of getting out. In terms of accessibility of these materials, The Leo Baeck Institute is committed to open access, which is a divide in the archival world, and we have heard about this here before. Are you committed to open access or not? And open access does not mean that everything is open to everybody regardless, but has to do where we are doing whatever is in our power and in our budget to provide the public with as much information as possible. Since October 2012, LBI has put this policy of open access into practice with the public launch of the digital archives, which we call DigiBaeck, in cooperation with the San Francisco-based nonprofit organization Internet Archive, but also by being part of the Center for Jewish History, with all the other partner organizations, the major Jewish libraries outside of Israel, that is YIVO, the American Jewish Historical Society, the Federation of Sephardi, the American Sephardi Federation, the Yeshiva University Art Museum, and a number of smaller libraries, plus a branch of the LBI archives at the Jewish Museum in Berlin. The Center for Jewish History provides the electronic infrastructure to host the digital assets and to put out the materials via various search facilities, the center's catalog system, but also with a special interface exclusively for LBI holdings via the LBI website. And if I will still have time, I can show some of the online features. All of the archive collections, and in more detail, each folder within the collections have their own URLs and can be found by internet search engines, crawlers, and therefore are available on the web. To make maximal use of the holdings, it is important to provide comprehensive keywords and subject headings, whereas in the past you had to go to the Leo Baeck Institute and search in the catalog for specific materials you were interested in. Now, searching the internet, you will find documents by way of their specific characteristics, by way of their specific metadata. Thus, the collections and the individual folders within collections come to their own, so to speak, and since the majority of materials are in German, this will attract researchers who are not necessarily interested in German Jewish topics, but it makes clear to be part of a larger picture. German Jewish history is also part of German history. It was the objective of the founders of the LBI to provide, quote, a comprehensive history of German Jewry, as Siegfried Moses, the treasurer of the state of Israel at the time, wrote in an article in the first volume of the LBI yearbook, titled Leo Baeck Institute of Jews from Germany. That was the yearbook in 1956, which gave a listing, an inventory of the historical account of the vanished German Jewish population, actually the entire Central European German-speaking Jewish population, which, except for small remnants, did indeed vanish from the European map. However, and here we come to the question of Jewish identity, Jewish life in Central Europe is re-emerging now, although within very different parameters. The strategies of collecting and preserving the legacy and the heritage of German Jews and all of German-speaking Jews, that is from the Baltic to the Black Sea, is to focus on the documents and stories of the individuals and families, the vanished organizations, and to record the remnants in exile, which then became a new diaspora. Among the founders were many Austrian Jews. Something around 30% of the holdings of the LBI stem from Austrian lands. And 3 generations after the Holocaust, there is renewed hope for Jewish life in Europe, and thus history has somewhat modified the expectations of the founders of the DigiBaeck Institute. Initially, there was great emphasis on the documentation of the leadership and prominent people, and minor attention was paid to the lives of ordinary people in what we now term everyday life history, Alltagsgeschichte. And insofar as the luminaries usually don't have ordinary lives, it is a very strong divide between those collections. The common people also reveal more about regional differences, customs and affiliations, and in the case of displaced people and refugees, the memories of their homes. And I want to refer here to the work of Maurice Halbwachs in his On Collective Memory, which has thematized these things very early on. Some people realized after 1933 that the documentation had to be preserved and rescued, had to form, from copies from the archives that most likely would be destroyed. And so some people did have early premonitions about what was coming. The collections of major genealogists are testimonies to that. The collections of Berthold Rosenthal for Baden and Southwest Germany, Michael Berolzheimer for Franconia, John Henry Richter for the Eastern Prussian lands, Max Markreich for the areas between Holland and Hamburg in the north of Germany, and there are many other collections of the sort. Genealogy became fancy after the turn of the century, at a time when the roots of German Jewish life detached from the traditional patterns of life, and one way to save the traditions was to delve deeper into family history. The Jewish Genealogical Society, Gesellschaft für jüdische Familienforschung, founded by Dr. Arthur Chellicher as the leader, and many members who produced, especially at the end of the Weimar period and the early 1930s, large amounts of family history that actually could be taken abroad. Rudolf Simonis in Berlin, who emigrated to Sweden, rescued vast collections of family history, family trees, and other genealogical information. Albert Fiebig, who was a young member of the Gesellschaft, who came to New York and ran an antiquarian and foreign book business. They all contributed their collections to the DigiBaeck Institute. There's, for instance, also the monumental work of Elisabeth Plaut, the wife of Rabbi Günther Plaut from Toronto. The Plauts came from Berlin, and Elisabeth Plaut's collection with a massive collection of 25,000 odd names. These are the legacies of the German Jews. testimonies to a vibrant and rich community, and yet their sense of preserving the family stories and traditions is also a sign of a vanishing and vanished culture. And I think it is a topic to be discussed. That is, their sense of a vanishing culture is part of a larger picture in that traditional life disappeared. It is the modern dilemma, and it is very hard, if not impossible, to maintain the culture and traditions of a life that gets knocked over by technology and globalization. And we see these signs already in the 1920s and 1930s. This question of the Jewish heritage and Jewish identity is a topic already for the refugees when they discuss in the issues of Aufbau in February 1939, under the impact of the November 1938 events, when they were setting up the aid organizations in New York, one of them called Self-Help, the Federation of German Jews in America, and in an article on February 1st, 1939, one of the editors of the paper, Reinhold Herz, writes, wir tragen in uns das erlebte Wissen unsere Geschichte in Deutschland, die für das Gesamtjudentum von unvergänglicher Bedeutung bleibt. And I translate, we carry in us the experienced knowledge of our history in Germany, which is of eternal importance for the entire Jewish world. And he continues, the cultural legacy of Jews from Germany is not simply German. It is also a very specific kind of Jewishness. It is the literature of Jews in the German language and the Jewish literature in the German language that we have to preserve. I mean, this legacy includes Heinrich Heine and Jakob Wassermann, Franz Werfel and Richard Beer Hoffmann, Hermann Cohen and Leo Baeck, Franz Rosenzweig and Martin Buber. It is our duty as Jews from Germany to be loyal to them in keeping their intellectual and spiritual works alive. Right, we are, and he continues, we have to create the basis for a new life in America, and he says we are not the first Jewish Landsmannschaft in America. The Hungarian, Polish, and Romanian Jews have associated long ago. This thought is not alien to us since we have done it years ago in Palestine. So this underscores the function also of Aufbau as the collective communication means of the refugees. So the exile community was reformulating their identity, and Aufbau was the voice of the German-speaking Jews, but it was not by giving up their German cultural roots, that is the roots of Jewish culture in the German tradition. Now this and this after Kristallnacht, when things had turned really bad in light of the previous 5 years, but again, not in what was still to come. In regard to the question of Holocaust materials, I just want to mention a few other examples. The collection of John Fried, who Mark Lewis had already briefly mentioned, his collection mainly consists of materials concerning the Nuremberg trials, and he was a refugee lawyer from Vienna who served as a legal counsel and consultant to the judges in the 12 successor trials of the international trial. And he actually was the only one who worked for more than one of the trials. He had permission to travel in Europe right after liberation and was collecting eyewitnesses and reports and material for the coming trials. His collection also includes an unfinished manuscript about the topic of human rights and international justice, which he sort of tackled with all his life. He died in the late 1990s, I believe. He was teaching. He was then a teacher of political science at Lehman College in New York in the City University system. And I still interviewed him. He still, until his final days, remained so caught up in the story that he couldn't get himself to finishing this monumental manuscript. It is one of the collections that is open to the public in the digital archives, and it's sort of inviting to research on it, and maybe at some point, in one way or another, it will become a published manuscript, or at least be available for more research. In the collection, there are in the archives, there are also more than 3,000 memoir manuscripts, plus many diaries, family histories. All of these things contain valuable information that contribute directly to what is our theme here at this conference. I also want to mention the Norbert Troller collection, an architect actually from Brünn, who left extensive memoirs from his experience in Terezin, in Auschwitz, and he actually went through a number of other camps. But he also produced a lot of artwork and actually architectural drawings that he did in Theresienstadt when he was working to, so to speak, design quarters for some people, and I mean, which I think mainly remained as designs. And so I just want to say that the entire archive of Leobeck Institute provides a view of many parts and many perspectives, but there is no totality, that it is a conglomerate of fragments and part of the larger puzzle that we are talking about. How am I doing in terms of?
I think you should come to an end.
Yeah. Okay. So then I just want to point out that as I said, the archive is fully online by way of the website of the Leobeck Institute, and you're of course all invited. And please, if you have questions, you can write to us. And thank you.
Yes, and now you also have a chance to ask questions, not only Dr. Mecklenburg, but also our other speakers.
Thank you for the very interesting presentations. I would have a question, more or less a question of understanding or clarification for Mrs. Bergman. You have mentioned that there existed something like a Polish model of documentation, and I was not totally sure what you mean by this, whether this is meant rather territorially or in terms of interest into Polish Jews, or if that really means different methods of collection of materials, interest in different types of materials. So I wonder if you could just make it clear to me how this Polish model of documentation differs, say, from the French one or the Hungarian one.
Thank you for the question. Of course, I meant methodology. I meant the preparation of tools for the interviewers, so they could know what kind of questions they might ask. They were not forced to ask all the questions. They were told or written that they can let the interviewees to talk as if it went well, if the interview went well. But in the other cases, they had this tool, a ready tool, which they could use to thank you, to obtain the data which they needed. So what I mean by the Polish model is simply that it was all published very early in 1945. It was available for everybody who was interested in conducting interviews, and it was then developed in the DP camps by those who were using it, like Feigenbaum or Bakalchuk, but they had the basis. That's what I meant.
I wonder how to preserve the memory of the illiterate Jews. They didn't write any letters, they didn't write any memoirs, and I think they are also part of the Jewish history.
Is it to me? The question is to me?
Das ist allgemein.
You are absolutely right, and this is one of the biggest problems. We, of course, cooperate with Yad Vashem in this project of collecting names of Holocaust victims, but in many cases we are just not able to find the names. We use various kinds of materials, like pre-war lists of Jewish members of Jewish communities, like telephone books, like various directories, just in order to be able to compile lists of those who lived in such and such community. But it was different in the occupied Poland. There were no deportation lists. Only in the Łódź ghetto, even in the Warsaw ghetto, there was no list of those who were imprisoned in the ghetto. And of those who were brought from many surrounding communities from the Warsaw district. They were not listed. So it's only the work of reconstruction. And we can do it using all kinds of documentation we have, including the Hayas Hebrew Hebrew immigrant aid society, where in the letters somebody was asking about his or her relatives. I saw them for the last time, or I had a contact with them for the last time in such and such time, and then we can include this information in the list. But this is a detective work regarding compiling the list of all Polish Jews. We even don't know exactly how many Polish Jews perished, because these are estimates. That's terrible. We know that's terrible. I'm sorry.
Commemorating names of people who didn't write letters, this is exactly the example I showed about the late Aryeh Bigun. He didn't write any letters. With help of vast quantities of materials and with computer technology, you are able, theoretically, to reconstruct histories of many people. We just hope it will be able to do it in the future on a vast scale, not only on 1 or 2 persons.
I just wanted to add to this that, for instance, we have these are not testimonies, but sort of testimonies of orphans in orphans' houses. So they were asked, what happened to your parents, what happened to your relatives? And this also adds us information about the members of their families. So all kinds of sources. Yeah,
if I may briefly say, I mean, it's also that only somehow in recent years, I mean, there has been a shift of paradigm, whereas in the past we used to talk about the 6 million, and I think it has changed to 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, and we sort of keep counting, and to give sort of faces to the individuals instead of statistics. That is a major shift in how this history is being dealt with.
I only have 2 comments. One is on the talk on Eleonore Bergman. You had to mention so many names, and now with the help of the Dubnow Institute in Leipzig, 2 German scholars informed us and wrote lengthy a book and an article on Joseph Wolf, and he deposited his archives in Heidelberg, and it was open, but the other comment is very brief to Mr. Mecklenburg. The Norbert Troller archive, of course, Norbert Troller is the uncle of Georg Stefan Troller, who is well known in the city, so there would really be, perhaps it would be there is somebody in the room or somebody who hears the proceedings of this conference or reads it later who will work on this archive.
I didn't get the last part.
Okay, thank you.
This is a question for Elena. What was would you say, the original purpose, the main purpose when they started this collection? Because you showed us a poster which seemed highly ideological to me. The Jews were presented as heroes. Very few were heroes, just as in Yad Vashem they are called martyrs, and they're not martyrs. And it had some ideological values to it, like we should never forget, we should never forgive. Interestingly enough, there's no word about revenge on that particular poster, and I think that revenge was more controversial than never forgive and never forget. But to what extent was it a moral or an ideological or even political effort, rather than laying the basis for historical research?
So, if I understand well, your question is not about this particular project of the monument, but this is about the collection in general, yes?
No, No, the original. When they started the Institute in Poland.
So this is...
What was their original purpose in doing it?
The original purpose of the Jewish Historical Commission was to collect any fact, any information on what happened to the Polish Jews. This is exactly the same purpose which Ringelblum had, that it should be known, it should be written by those who lived through it, that it should not be only based on German sources. And especially Blumenthal's book, which I mentioned, is showing how the language of official German documentation made it impossible to understand what happened, because the words were used which were meaningless. I mean, they were meaningful eventually, but because of their use by the German administration. So this was the original purpose. They wanted to provide material for future full means seen from both sides history of what happened to the Jews, and especially to the Polish Jews, as we are talking about this Polish Commission.
Dr. Brent.
So, Lena, I have a follow-up question to that, which is, did the communist regime in Poland or through pressure from Soviet Union have any impact on the activities of JICH and collection efforts and so forth?
Well, in the broad sense, it definitely had, because people who did not want to stay in this regime just left. So there were no scholarship, not as much as it was at the beginning behind this whole effort, or leading this effort. But there was no, practically no change for the, let's say, the collections remain intact. People were changed. So as far as I know, the work of the Institute as such was disturbed in the sense that it was badly founded, that it was lacking staff, it was lacking means, and it could not afford publishing. This is completely different world after the takeover of the communist system. I mean, 49-50, because this was the moment when it changed. And because before it was still hope that there will be some, even despite the pogrom in Kielce, even despite the massive emigration in 46, then there was hope that there will be life, there will be conditions for development of Jewish culture. So they still hoped, but of course in 1949 it all changed, and the Institute in fact sort of survived, we can say, until the change of the system.
Remarkable, though. I don't know of another such institute in a communist regime.
But it was completely isolated. We are now an open institution. We publish quite a lot. We have a website. Everybody knows what we are doing. We have a lot of visitors. And at that time, it was in fact limited to smaller and smaller number of the Jews who knew at all about the existence of the Institute, maybe some visitors from abroad, but very rarely, and that was it. Although the quarterly was published all the time. From 1950, the Bulletin of the Jewish Historical Institute was published without breaks. Just there were times that there was no money to publish really 4 issues a year. Sometimes it was 2, sometimes 3. But it was in fact the sort of a ghetto.
Thank you. Just as a footnote to the question by the gentleman in the blue and white shirt, I was struck when I saw the posters that he referred to by the contrast with a document that I photographed in the collection of the Central Jewish Historical Commission the last time I was doing research in Ms. Bergman's archive. Because of the contrast between that visual language, which was in some ways very propagandistic, and this document, which was, I believe, from 1944. I wish I could show it to you. If anyone's interested, I can, because later it's on my computer. It's a typewritten announcement in a handmade frame that I believe was posted on a door. And it simply says, in connection with the documentary historical action, we request everyone owning memoirs and diaries from the time of the Hitler occupation to come to the seat of the Jewish committee between the hours of 9 and 2. So completely devoid of this kind of rhetoric that you refer to, and very clearly identifying the purpose of this collecting as documentation for historical purposes. Pardon? I believe it was 1944, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, this is a question for Dr. Borut. It's a riddle I've thought about many years, and you probably don't have the answer to it, but maybe you can help me. There were only 3 survivors of the Oynik Shabbos archive, and only one of those, Hirschwasser, knew the archive inside and out. He was at all the weekly meetings. He, in fact, was the one who classified the materials, put the codes on the pages, took the materials to the hideouts. When the archive was found, the first part in September 46, he played a major role in the cataloging of the archive. So here's my question. He comes to Israel, I think, in 1950, and he dies in 1980. So he's in Israel for 30 years. And I often ask myself, why was it that Yad Vashem never once sat down with Hirschwasser and systematically interviewed him about the inner workings of the archive, of which we know very, very little. It's as if here's the one person who is at the center of the biggest documentation project in Nazi-occupied Europe, or one of the biggest, and he's living in Israel, and he in fact writes for Yediot Yad Vashem here and there, but the archive never said, let's sit down and reconstruct the inner workings of the archive. And we could say the same for other people from Vilna. But I'm just curious whether you've heard anything, any explanation of why that never happened.
Well, I'm the expert on other countries. I don't know much about Poland and those things. What I can say from what I know about my own sphere is that sometimes people with which Yad Vashem wants very much to talk do not wish to talk. I have no idea if this has to do with Mr. Schwarzer. Maybe you'll give me the details later, and I'll pass on that question to the people who are better equipped to answer that question than me.
Question because I'm a little bit surprised the way the Historical Institute is now presented in communist Poland in kind of a continuity. I mean, I just remember there were anti-Semitic campaigns in communist Poland. Was this institute in no way touched by this, or didn't it have any influence on the work of the history? I mean, I'm surprised about that now, that it only went into isolation, it was underground, and nothing happened really to the Institute.
I wouldn't say that nothing happened because many people left during the anti-Semitic campaign of '68, and the Institute remained almost empty. So this was, and the director, Arthur Eisenbach at the time, resigned. And so, as I said, the collections were there. The collections were in terrible condition. There was no people to take care of them, to catalog, to conserve, etc., etc. They were sitting in the storage. And this is, well, at least. Although, yes, there was. I've heard. I have not proof, but I've heard that in '68 some people wanted to pack the whole Ringelblum archive and hide it again, because nobody knew what would happen.
Just a short remark. I was hesitant to say it, but in this connection, I think the question of parallels to the Žid in Eastern Europe, then the Jewish Museum in Prague or the State Jewish Museum in Prague should be mentioned, although it had a much broader scope and a slightly different scope of activities and different collections. But it certainly is an institution which, under all the constraints of communism, can do research and create archival collections and other collections, including the Holocaust. So I think that would be, in my mind, the closer parallel to the Žid.
I just wanted to add a few words to what I said. That first of all, when the Institute was formally or officially opened, its first director, no, in fact, its second director, Bernard Bergman, said that the Institute will work, that the research in the Institute will be not only on the Holocaust, but on the 1,000 years of Jewish life in Poland. So this was, of course, a very important shift from the works of the Jewish Historical Commission, who was entirely focused on the Holocaust or wartime. But following this '68 campaign and whatever happened and this lack of staff, this created a kind of vacuum. I mean, who can work in the Institute? who wanted to work. The conditions were terrible. I mean, financial conditions, work conditions. And it's quite I shouldn't say that. Very interesting, phenomenon. That this was the time when the people who wanted to join the staff and who eventually joined the staff were non-Jews, and this started exactly. I mean, not immediately after '68, but in fact, as a result of the '68.
I have to say that I get an uneasy feeling here and now. I don't want to make any declaration, or I'm not even able to do it. But I have the feeling that now we are getting into a mood of collaboration accusations, and I don't like that. And I think it's not appropriate. A Jewish institution grown up after the Holocaust has, I think, a right to try to stay, even if it's in such a reduced condition as the DigiBaeck and many other institutions were, even if they have to accommodate as Jews under oppression did centuries ago. So it was the time, it was the reaction. You haven't the right to insist on seeing heroes anywhere.
Are there any more questions?
I don't know.
Okay. So I think you will all go to your very well-deserved lunch break. And please be back in time at 3 p.m. for our next session.